I'll pay you $1 million to marry me." Bia Santos nearly dropped her chainsaw. The mud-covered stranger who just crawled out of the ditch beside her driveway was either completely insane or suffering from a serious head injury. Possibly both. "I'm sorry. What now?" She killed the engine and stared at him through the howling hurricane. His expensive suit was shredded, his designer shoes were caked with mud, and there was blood streaming down his face. But he was looking at her like she was his salvation. $1 million, he repeated, swaying on his feet. "Cash, I need a wife. Right now. Tonight." Bia blinked rainwater out of her eyes. "Okay, buddy. I think you hit your head harder than... Listen, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm desperate. There's this contract and I need to be married by midnight or I lose everything. My grandfather's will, it's complicated, but..." He stumbled forward, catching himself on her fence post. "Please, I'll wire the money tonight. $1 million for one night of marriage." Bia stared at him. The massive oak tree that had crashed across her driveway during the hurricane suddenly seemed like the least of her problems. "Are you having some kind of breakdown? Because I was just trying to clear this tree so I can get to work tomorrow, and now you're proposing to me with a chainsaw in my hands. I know how this looks. Like a rich lunatic who escaped from somewhere." She gestured with her free hand. "Because that's exactly how this looks." He laughed, but it came out desperate. "You're not wrong, but I'm serious about the money. $1 million. All you have to do is sign a piece of paper." "And why exactly would you pay a complete stranger $1 million to marry you?" "Because..." He started to answer, then stopped. His face went completely blank, like someone had just flipped a switch. I don't remember. His voice cracked. "I don't remember." That's when Bia noticed the blood. A lot of it, mixing with rainwater and streaming down his face from a gash above his left temple. His expensive watch was shattered, and the way he was holding his rib suggested more than just bruised pride. Oh hell. She killed the chainsaw and rushed to him. "You're not just some rich jerk wandering around my property, are you? You're hurt." "I can't." He swayed dangerously. "Everything's foggy. I was driving and then... nothing. I woke up in a ditch about a mile from here." Bia caught him as his knees buckled, his weight nearly taking them both down. He was solid muscle beneath that ruined suit, and the way he instinctively tried to protect her from the fall made something flutter in her chest. "Easy there, mystery man. What's your name?" Panic crept into his voice. "I don't know. I can't remember my own name." Thunder crashed overhead and the rain intensified. Bia made a decision that would change everything. "Okay, listen to me. I'm Bia Santos, and you're going to be fine. Can you walk? Because we need to get you inside before this storm gets worse." As she helped him toward her small farmhouse, Bia couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a terrible mistake. Rich men didn't just appear in her backyard during hurricanes. They certainly didn't lose their memories and need rescuing by women who cut their own firewood. But when he looked at her, really looked at her, with those storm-gray eyes full of gratitude and something else she couldn't name, her heart did something stupid. "Thank you," he whispered as they reached her porch. "I don't know who I am, but thank you." Bia pushed open her front door, and the warmth of her modest home enveloped them. Her living room was a patchwork of second-hand furniture and handmade quilts, guitars propped in corners, books stacked everywhere. The fire she'd built earlier crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with photos of family and friends. It was the opposite of everything his expensive clothes suggested he was used to. "Sit," she ordered, guiding him to her worn couch. "And don't you dare drip on my grandmother's quilt." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." As Bia knelt beside him with her first aid kit, she had no idea she was patching up Michael Ashford, the youngest billionaire in America, the man who just fired 300 employees without blinking, the same man whose face was plastered across every business magazine in the country. She had no idea that in 6 months he'd walk back into her life as the cold, arrogant CEO who'd forgotten not just his name, but every moment of tenderness they were about to share. All she knew was that a storm had brought her a broken man who needed healing, and Bia Santos had always been a fool for lost causes. You know, most people don't bleed on my grandmother's quilt and then ask for pancakes. Bia stood in her tiny kitchen doorway, watching the mysterious man she'd rescued from the storm attempt to eat breakfast one-handed. His left arm was in a makeshift sling, her old guitar strap actually, and the butterfly bandages on his forehead made him look like he'd gone 10 rounds with a hurricane, which, technically, he had. "I'm sorry about the quilt," he said, looking genuinely distressed. "And I wasn't asking for pancakes, I was just... They smell incredible." 3 days. 3 days since he'd crawled out of that ditch and proposed to her with a chainsaw in her hands. 3 days of playing nursemaid to a man who claimed his name was Michael, the only thing that had come back to him, but couldn't remember his last name, his address, or why he'd been willing to pay a stranger $1 million to marry him. 3 days of trying to ignore how her heart did stupid things every time he smiled. "Well, you're in luck." She flipped another pancake with perhaps more force than necessary. "I made extra. But you're washing dishes. With one good arm? Figure it out, genius. You're the one who was supposedly worth $1 million 3 days ago." Michael, if that was even his real name, laughed. It was a rich, warm sound that filled her small kitchen like honey. Fair point. Though I'm beginning to wonder if I was having some kind of breakdown when I said that. Bia turned to face him, spatula in hand. "You think?" The truth was, she'd been wondering the same thing. The expensive suit had been ruined, but the watch, even shattered, was clearly worth more than her car. His hands were soft, manicured, the hands of someone who'd never done manual labor. Everything about him screamed money, from his perfect teeth to the way he unconsciously straightened his shoulders when he sat. But there was something else. Something in the way he'd helped her stack firewood yesterday, despite his injured arm. The way he'd insisted on attempting to fix her leaky faucet with tools he clearly didn't know how to use. The way he'd listened, really listened, when she'd told him about her 3 jobs, her plans to save enough money to open her own music school someday. "Bia," he said quietly, and the way he said her name made her stomach flutter. "I need to ask you something." She set down the spatula. "Shoot. These past 3 days, have you felt it too? This..." He gestured helplessly between them. "I don't know what to call it." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Michael, I know it's crazy. I know I'm probably some kind of disaster you pulled out of a ditch. But I can't stop thinking that maybe I ended up here for a reason." He stood up, moving toward her with that careful grace she was beginning to recognize. "Maybe I was supposed to find you. You were running from something," she said, backing against the counter. "That's what people do when they offer to pay strangers to marry them. They're desperate. Maybe I was." He stopped just close enough that she could smell his skin, soap and something uniquely him that made her dizzy. "But I'm not running anymore." The pancakes were burning. She could hear them sizzling in the pan, but she couldn't make herself move. Not when he was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "This is insane," she whispered. "Probably." His good hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. "But I've never felt more sane in my life." When he kissed her, it was soft and careful and perfect. Like coming home to a place she'd never been before. Like every corny love song she'd ever rolled her eyes at was suddenly making perfect sense. The smoke detector chose that moment to shriek. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Bia spun around to rescue the pancakes from certain doom. "Smooth, Santos," she muttered, scraping charred batter off the pan. "Really smooth." Michael laughed, and when she glanced back at him, his smile was so bright it should have come with a warning label. "I like you flustered." "I am not flustered. I'm concerned about breakfast." "Right." He moved behind her, his good arm sliding around her waist. "Just breakfast." She melted against him before she could stop herself. This was dangerous. This feeling, this man, this whole situation, it was like standing in the middle of a lightning storm and begging to be struck. "Michael," she said, not moving away. "What if you remember?" What if you have a wife somewhere or... I don't. His voice was certain. I would remember you. I would remember feeling like this. The rational part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive and independent for 26 years, was screaming warnings. Men like him didn't end up with women like her. Men with expensive watches and soft hands didn't fall for diner waitresses who cut their own firewood. But the way he held her, like she was precious, like she was worth something more than her ability to work 3 jobs and pay her bills on time, it made her want to believe in fairy tales. The pancakes are definitely ruined, she said. I don't care about the pancakes. Good thing, because I'm about to make us scrambled eggs instead. Bia. He turned her in his arms and his expression was so tender it made her chest ache. Thank you. For everything. For taking care of me. For not calling the police when I showed up talking crazy. For what? Feeding you? It's basic human decency, Michael. No, it's not. His thumb traced her lower lip and she shivered. It's extraordinary. You're extraordinary. Before she could respond, before she could remind him that she was just a small-town girl with big dreams and small bank account, he was kissing her again. Deeper this time, hungrier, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. The rational part of her brain gave up and went silent. Later, much later, they sat on her front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The storm had cleared, leaving everything washed clean and sparkling. Michael's head was in her lap and she was absently running her fingers through his dark hair, while he told her about the fragments of memory that had been coming back. I remember being in boardrooms, he said. Lots of them. And I remember being angry all the time, frustrated, like I was trapped in a life that didn't fit. Maybe that's why you were running, Bia suggested softly. Maybe. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. All I know is that I don't want to remember anything that would take me away from this. From you. Her heart did that fluttering thing again. Michael, I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Bia's hand stilled in his hair. You don't even know me, she whispered. I know you work 3 jobs and still find time to teach kids guitar. I know you sing in the shower and you always burn the first pancake. I know you're brave enough to take in strange men during hurricanes and kind enough to nurse them back to health. He sat up, taking her hands in his. I know you make me want to be better than whoever I was before. Tears blurred her vision. This is happening too fast. I know, but Bia, what if we don't have time? What if tomorrow I remember something that changes everything? What if... Then we'll deal with it tomorrow. She leaned forward, kissing him softly. Today, right now, it's just us. He smiled against her lips. Just us. Neither of them noticed the black sedan that had been parked at the end of her driveway for the past hour, or the man in the expensive suit taking photos with a telephoto lens. Neither of them knew that Michael Ashford's disappearance had made national news, or that the inheritance he'd been running from was worth $20 billion. Neither of them suspected that in exactly 12 hours, everything would change. For now, there was just the sunset, and the man she was falling in love with, and the dangerous, intoxicating belief that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could come true. Even for girls who cut their own firewood and worked 3 jobs to chase impossible dreams. Mr. Ashford, your board meeting starts in 20 minutes. The voice cut through Bia's sleep like a blade. She jolted awake, disoriented, her heart hammering as she registered the unfamiliar female voice coming from her living room. Michael's arm tightened around her waist. They'd fallen asleep on the couch watching an old movie, and she felt him go rigid against her. Mr. Ashford? The voice was crisp, professional, impatient. Sir, we really need to go. Bia sat up slowly, her blood turning to ice. Through the sheer curtains, she could see a woman in a severe black suit standing in her doorway, flanked by 2 men who looked like they could bench press her entire house. Michael, she whispered, but when she looked at him, everything inside her shattered. His face had changed. Gone was the warm, uncertain man who'd helped her make breakfast that morning. In his place sat someone else entirely, someone cold, controlled, and looking at her like he'd never seen her before in his life. "Michael Ashford," he said quietly, his voice completely different, sharper, emptier. "CEO of Ashford Industries, net worth $23 billion. He stood up, straightening his borrowed clothes with mechanical precision. "And you're Bia Santos, 26 years old, 3 jobs, lives alone in rural North Carolina." The casual way he recited facts about her, like she was a file he'd memorized, made her stomach lurch. "You remember?" "Everything." He didn't look at her when he said it. "The board meeting I was running from. The inheritance clause that required marriage by midnight. The car accident during the storm." His jaw tightened. The desperate proposal to a complete stranger. "Mr. Ashford," the woman in the doorway called again, her tone suggesting this was not a request. "The helicopter is waiting." Helicopter. Of course there was a helicopter. Bia pulled the throw blanket around herself, suddenly feeling exposed in her tank top and shorts. "So that's it? You just remember who you are and I become nobody?" For the first time since waking up, Michael looked directly at her. The man who'd told her he loved her, who'd kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, stared at her with the emotional warmth of a tax document. "You were never anybody to me," he said with brutal efficiency. "You were a convenience, a temporary solution to a legal problem." The words hit her like physical blows. "That's not true. Yesterday you said..." "Yesterday I had a brain injury." He moved toward the door, not even glancing back at the couch where they'd shared their first kiss, where he'd held her and promised that nothing would change. People say a lot of things when they're not thinking clearly. "So, the past 4 days meant nothing?" Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "Everything we shared, everything you told me about wanting to be better, all lies?" "Not lies, delusions." He paused at the doorway, his hand on the frame. "I'm sorry if you got the wrong impression, but I'm not the man you think I am. I never was." The woman in the suit stepped forward, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Ashford, allow me to introduce myself to your hostess. I'm Victoria Sterling, your head of public relations. We'll need to discuss the terms of a non-disclosure agreement." "NDA?" Bia stood up, clutching the blanket tighter. "You want me to sign an NDA?" "Standard procedure," Victoria replied smoothly. "Given Mr. Ashford's profile, we can't have stories about his brief indisposition reaching the media. I'm sure you understand." "What I understand," Bia said, her voice gaining strength, "is that you people think money can buy anything, including silence." Michael's jaw tightened, but he still wouldn't look at her. "Ms. Sterling will explain the compensation package. It's generous." "Compensation package?" The words came out as a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You mean hush money?" "I mean payment for services rendered," Michael said coldly. "Room and board for 4 days, basic medical assistance. Transportation will be provided to replace your damaged fence." Each word was a calculated insult, designed to reduce everything they'd shared to a business transaction. Bia felt something break inside her chest, something that had been bright and hopeful and stupidly, recklessly in love. "Get out," she whispered. "Ms. Santos," Victoria began. "Perhaps we could discuss—" "Get out!" Bia screamed, and the force of her anger surprised even her. "All of you, get off my property right now." For just a moment, just one heartbeat, something flickered across Michael's face. Pain, maybe. Regret. But it was gone so fast she might have imagined it. "Have the papers sent by courier," he told Victoria, then walked out of Bia's house without looking back. She stood frozen in her living room, watching through the window as they escorted him to a black helicopter that had landed in her front yard. The rotors were already spinning, kicking up dust and debris, turning her carefully tended flower garden into chaos. Just before he climbed into the aircraft, Michael stopped, turned. For one impossible second, their eyes met across the distance, and Bia saw something in his expression that looked almost like goodbye. Then he was gone. The helicopter lifted off, taking with it the last 4 days of her life. The best 4 days, if she was being honest. and leaving behind nothing but settling dust and the echo of rotors fading into the morning sky. Bea sank onto her couch, still clutching the blanket, and stared at the spot where Michael had been sitting when he'd told her he loved her, where he'd traced patterns on her skin and promised that nothing would take him away from this moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. NDA and compensation details attached. Please review and return signed copies within 24 hours. V. Sterling, Ashford Industries. She deleted it without opening the attachment. Then she buried her face in the blanket that still smelled like him and cried until there was nothing left. 3 hours later, Bea was back at work at the diner, moving through her shift like a zombie. The breakfast rush was in full swing, but she kept messing up orders, bringing coffee when people asked for juice, forgetting to write down substitutions. "Honey, you look like death warmed over," said Marlene, the other waitress. "You coming down with something?" "Something like that," Bea muttered, refilling salt shakers with mechanical precision. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up automatically to greet the new customer. Her blood froze. A man in an expensive suit was settling into booth 3, and even though it wasn't Michael, everything about him screamed money and power. Slicked back hair, Rolex watch, the kind of smug expression that came from never having to worry about rent. He was staring at her with undisguised interest, and when their eyes met, he smiled, the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. "Bea Santos?" he called out, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "I'm James Morrison from the National Enquirer. I'd love to chat about your recent relationship with Michael Ashford." The coffee pot slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor in an explosion of ceramic and hot liquid. Every head in the diner turned toward them, and Bea felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, grabbing a towel to clean up the mess. "Come now, Ms. Santos. We have photos, very interesting photos of you and Mr. Ashford on your front porch, looking quite intimate." He pulled out his phone, swiping to a picture that made Bea's knees nearly buckle. It was them, the night before, on her porch swing. Michael's head in her lap, her fingers in his hair, both of them looking at each other like nothing else in the world existed. $50,000, Morrison said, sliding a business card across the table. "For an exclusive interview about your secret romance with America's youngest billionaire." "What do you say?" Bea looked at the card, then at the photo, then at the faces of her co-workers and customers, all of them staring at her with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and something that looked uncomfortably like pity. She thought about Michael's cold voice saying she'd never been anybody to him, about Victoria Sterling's sharp smile and talk of NDAs, about 4 days of feeling like she mattered to someone, only to discover it had all been a lie. "You can keep your money," she said quietly, walking away from the booth. "Mrs. Santos, this story is going to run with or without your cooperation," Morrison called after her. "Wouldn't you rather control the narrative?" Bea untied her apron and hung it on the hook by the kitchen door. "Marlene, tell Dave I'm done for the day." "Honey, you can't leave in the middle of a shift." "Watch me." She walked out of the diner and climbed into her beat-up pickup truck, ignoring Morrison's shouts behind her. As she drove home, she passed 3 more news vans heading in the opposite direction. By the time she reached her house, there were already reporters camped out at the end of her driveway. The fairy tale was officially over, and somehow, the real nightmare was just beginning. "Turn off the TV, Bea. Just turn it off." Her best friend Maya reached for the remote, but Bea caught her wrist. "No, I need to see this." On the screen, Michael Ashford stood behind a podium at what the news ticker identified as Emergency Press Conference, Ashford Industries headquarters. He looked every inch the billionaire CEO, perfectly pressed charcoal suit, hair styled to perfection, expression as cold and controlled as carved marble. "The stories circulating about my recent personal life are completely false," he said, his voice carrying that same businesslike tone he'd used to destroy her heart 3 days ago. "I was involved in a minor car accident during the recent hurricane and received temporary assistance from a local resident. Any suggestion of a romantic relationship is pure fiction." "Pure fiction," Bea repeated hollowly. 4 days of pure fiction. Maya squeezed her shoulder. Honey, turn it off. You're just torturing yourself. But Bia couldn't look away, couldn't stop watching the man who'd held her in his arms and promised she was extraordinary dismiss their entire relationship with the emotional investment of someone reading a grocery list. Furthermore, Michael continued, I want to be clear that Ms. Santos was compensated appropriately for her assistance. Any attempt to portray this as something more than a business transaction is both inaccurate and inappropriate. A reporter shouted from the crowd, Mr. Ashford, the photos show you in what appears to be an intimate embrace. The photos show nothing more than a tired, injured man receiving basic medical care. I'm disappointed that anyone would try to sensationalize such a mundane situation. Mundane. Their entire relationship, every kiss, every laugh, every whispered confession, was mundane. Bia's phone buzzed with another unknown number. She'd been getting calls all day, reporters and bloggers and random strangers who'd somehow gotten her number. She'd stopped answering after the fifth person asked if she was the gold digger who tried to trap Michael Ashford. That's it. Maya grabbed the remote and clicked off the TV. You're coming to stay with me in Charlotte until this blows over. I can't leave, I have work. What work? Dave fired you yesterday, remember? Said having paparazzi outside the diner was bad for business. Maya's voice was gentle but firm. And Mrs. Henderson canceled your guitar lessons because she doesn't want her daughter exposed to this kind of scandal. The truth hit Bia like a physical blow. In 3 days, she'd lost 2 of her 3 jobs. The landscaping gig was hanging by a thread. Mr. Peterson had already called to say he was reconsidering their arrangement given the media attention. She was 26 years old and her entire life was falling apart because she'd been stupid enough to fall in love with a man who'd never existed in the first place. I should have taken Morrison's money, she said bitterly. $50,000 for an interview. At least then I'd have something to show for being humiliated on national television. Don't you dare, Maya said fiercely. Don't you dare let them turn you into something you're not. A sharp knock on the front door made them both freeze. Through the window, Bia could see another news van had joined the 3 already parked at the end of her driveway. Ms. Santos, a voice called. Channel 7 News. We'd like to get your side of the story. Your side of the story, Maya muttered. Like there are 2 sides to being abandoned by a billionaire. But as they sat there, hiding in Bia's own home while strangers pounded on her door and invaded her privacy, something inside her began to shift. The hurt was still there, raw and consuming, but underneath it, anger was starting to build. She thought about Michael standing at that podium, erasing her from his story like she'd never mattered, calling their relationship mundane and fiction, while she was losing everything, her jobs, her reputation, her peace of mind. She thought about Victoria Sterling's sharp smile and the NDA she'd tried to force down Bia's throat, about the casual assumption that her silence could be bought, that her dignity was just another business expense. Most of all, she thought about the man who'd traced patterns on her skin and told her she made him want to be better, the man who'd kissed her like she was precious and promised that nothing would take him away from her. That man had been real. She knew it in her bones, in the way he'd held her, in the vulnerable moments when his guard had been completely down. Whatever Michael Ashford was telling the world now, whatever lies he was feeding himself, that man had been real. And he'd loved her. Maya, she said slowly, I need you to drive me somewhere. Where? New York City. Bia stood up, feeling stronger than she had in days. I'm going to see Michael. Bia, no. That's exactly what they want you to do. They're probably hoping you'll show up looking desperate so they can get more photos. I don't care about the photos. She moved to her bedroom, pulling out the small suitcase she'd inherited from her grandmother. I care about the truth. What truth? He made it pretty clear how he feels about you. He made it clear how he feels about being Michael Ashford, CEO. Bia threw clothes into the suitcase without really looking at them. But I'm not going to see the CEO. I'm going to see Michael. The man who helped me stack firewood and tried to fix my leaky faucet even though he had no idea what he was doing. Maya followed her into the bedroom, worry creasing her features. Honey, what if he really doesn't remember? What if those 4 days meant nothing to him? Then at least I'll know for sure. Bia zipped up the suitcase and turned to face her friend. Maya, I've spent my whole life playing it safe. Working 3 jobs, saving every penny, never taking risks because I couldn't afford to fail. And for 4 days I let myself believe in something impossible. And look how that turned out. Yeah, it hurt. It's still hurting. Bia's voice grew stronger. But you know what hurts worse? The idea that I'm going to let fear stop me from fighting for something real. That I'm going to let Michael Ashford convince the world, convince himself, that what we had was nothing. She grabbed her car keys from the dresser. I'm done being nobody to him. I'm done being a footnote in his story. What are you going to do? Storm into his office? Demand he remember loving you? I'm going to remind him who he was before he remembered who he's supposed to be. Bia headed for the front door, then stopped. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man America's youngest billionaire really is. Maya stared at her for a long moment, then shook her head with a mixture of admiration and terror. You're completely insane. Probably. Bia smiled for the first time in 3 days. But I'm done being the victim in this story. They slipped out the back door and through the woods to Maya's car, parked a quarter-mile away to avoid the reporters. As they drove toward the highway, Bia caught a glimpse of her house in the side mirror, surrounded by news vans and strangers, no longer the safe haven it had been just a week ago. But for the first time since Michael had walked out of her life, she felt like she could breathe. So, Maya said as they merged onto I-95 North, what's the plan? And please tell me it involves more than just showing up at his office and hoping for the best. Bia pulled out her phone and scrolled through the dozens of missed calls from reporters. She found James Morrison's number, the National Enquirer journalist who'd tracked her down at the diner, and hit call back. Ms. Santos? Morrison answered on the first ring, sounding pleased. I was hoping you'd reconsider. 50,000, Bia interrupted. For an exclusive interview, but I have conditions. I'm listening. It happens in New York, tomorrow, and you bring cameras. She met Maya's shocked expression in the rearview mirror. Because if Michael Ashford wants to play games with the media, he's about to learn that I know how to play them too. Maya nearly swerved off the highway. Bia, what are you doing? Something stupid, she admitted. Something reckless. Something that's going to either win him back or destroy us both. As they drove through the night toward New York City, Bia stared out at the highway stretching endlessly ahead of them. In 12 hours she would either be reunited with the man she loved, or she would be declaring war on one of the most powerful men in America. Either way, she was done being nobody. Either way, the fairy tale was about to have a very different ending than anyone expected. Mr. Ashford will see you now. The receptionist's voice was perfectly neutral, but Bia caught the flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Word had clearly spread through the 42nd floor of the Ashford Industries Tower that the woman from the news, the one their CEO had publicly dismissed as a business transaction, was here for an unscheduled visit. Bia smoothed her dress, the only nice thing she owned, a simple black number she'd worn to her grandfather's funeral 2 years ago, and followed the receptionist down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. She'd been in New York for exactly 18 hours. 18 hours since she'd given James Morrison the interview of his career in a hotel room overlooking Central Park. 18 hours since she'd looked directly into the camera and told America exactly what kind of man their golden boy billionaire really was. The story had gone live an hour ago. Through here, the receptionist said, opening massive double doors that led to an office bigger than Bia's entire house. Michael stood with his back to her, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Manhattan. He was on the phone, speaking in clipped, furious tones. I don't care what it costs. Kill the story. Buy the magazine if you have to. He turned as she entered, and their eyes met across the expanse of his office. I'll call you back. He ended the call and set his phone down with deliberate precision. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The billionaire CEO in his perfectly tailored suit and the small-town waitress who'd just declared war on his empire. Well, he said finally, his voice as cold as Arctic wind, you certainly know how to make an entrance. I learned from the best. Bea stepped further into the office, her heels clicking against marble floors. Nice office, by the way. Very soulless. It suits you. Michael's jaw tightened. What do you want, Bea? Oh, I think you know what I want. She pulled out her phone and opened the news app, where the headline screamed in bold letters, "The Billionaire's Lie. Waitress reveals the truth about Michael Ashford's secret romance." Catchy headline, don't you think? She held up the phone so he could see the photo accompanying the article, one of the intimate shots the paparazzi had taken on her porch, now broadcast to millions of people. Morrison's a talented writer. Really captured the essence of our mundane business transaction. You gave an interview. It wasn't a question. Michael's voice was deadly quiet. Exclusive interview. $50,000. She tucked the phone back into her purse. Turns out my silence wasn't as worthless as your PR team thought. Do you have any idea what you've done? Told the truth? Bea moved closer, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Anger, yes, but something else. Something that looked almost like panic. About how you held me while I cried after watching a sad movie. About how you tried to fix my faucet even though you'd clearly never held a wrench in your life. About how you told me you loved me. Stop. About how you made love to me like I was the most precious thing in your world. Stop. Michael stepped toward her, his composure finally cracking. You don't understand what you've done. The board is furious. Stock prices are plummeting. I have shareholders demanding explanations. And I have a life that's been destroyed. The words exploded out of her, all the pain and rage she'd been holding back for 5 days. I lost my jobs, Michael. All of them. My reputation is ruined. I can't even go to the grocery store without people staring at me like I'm some kind of predator who tried to trap you. You think this helps? You think telling the world our private business makes anything better? I think, Bea said, stepping close enough to smell his cologne, the same scent that had haunted her dreams. That you're scared. Scared? Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of what? Of remembering how it felt to be human. She reached up and straightened his tie, the gesture so intimate and familiar that his breath caught. Of admitting that for 4 days you weren't Michael Ashford, billionaire CEO. You were just Michael and you were happy. For a moment, just one heartbeat, his mask slipped. She saw the man she'd fallen in love with, vulnerable and lost and fighting against something he couldn't name. Then the walls slammed back into place. You're delusional, he said, stepping back from her touch. Whatever you think happened between us was the result of a brain injury. Nothing more. Really? Bea smiled, but it was sharp enough to cut. Then you won't mind if I do another interview, maybe with 60 Minutes this time. I'm sure they'd love to hear about your marriage proposal, about how desperate you were to find a wife before midnight to secure your inheritance. Michael went very still. What inheritance? Oh, you don't remember that part? She tilted her head, studying his face. You told me about your grandfather's will. How you had to be married by your 30th birthday, which was that night, or lose everything. That's why you were running, wasn't it? That's why you crashed your car in the middle of a hurricane. The color drained from his face. That's impossible. My grandfather died when I was 15. Did he? Bea pulled out her phone again, this time opening the photos James Morrison had shown her during their interview prep. Because according to public records, Harrison Ashford died 6 months ago. And according to his will, which was filed with the probate court and is a matter of public record, his entire estate was left to his grandson Michael, with one very interesting condition. She showed him the phone screen where a legal document was displayed. Marriage by midnight on his 30th birthday or the $23 billion inheritance goes to charity. Ring any bells? Michael stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. This can't be real. It's real. And here's the interesting part. You turned 30 exactly 1 week ago. The night you proposed to me with a chainsaw in my hands. Bea moved closer again, pressing her advantage. So either this is the most elaborate con in history, or you really were desperate enough to marry a complete stranger to save your fortune. I can't. Michael sat down heavily in his desk chair, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. For the first time since she'd known him, both versions of him, he looked completely lost. The question is, Bea continued, settling into the chair across from his desk like they were old friends having a casual conversation. What happened to that marriage? Because according to my research, there's no record of you getting married that night, which means I lost everything. Michael's voice was hollow. $23 billion. Gone. Not everything, Bea said softly. You found me. He looked up at her then, and she saw the exact moment when the walls started to crumble. When the CEO mask began to slip and the man underneath, the man who'd held her and loved her and promised her the world, began to remember. Bea, he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. I'm here, she said simply. The intercom on his desk crackled to life. Mr. Ashford, the board is here for the emergency meeting. Michael stared at the intercom, then at Bea, then at the legal document still displayed on her phone. Tell them to wait. Sir, they're very insistent. Tell them, he said, his voice gaining strength, that Michael Ashford is busy remembering what's really important. Bea's heart stuttered in her chest. Michael. He stood up and moved around the desk, stopping just in front of her chair. I remember, he said quietly. Not everything, but pieces. The way you sang while you made breakfast. How you laughed when I tried to help with the firewood and nearly took out your fence instead of the tree. What else? She whispered. I remember telling you I loved you. He cupped her face in his hands, the gesture so gentle and familiar that tears sprang to her eyes. And I remember meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. The inheritance can go to hell. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of 5 days' worth of regret. I found something worth more than $23 billion, and I was stupid enough to walk away from it. Mr. Ashford. The intercom crackled again, more urgent this time. The board is threatening to call for a vote of no confidence if you don't. Michael reached over and unplugged the intercom entirely. Let them vote. Let them take the company. I don't care anymore. You don't mean that? I do. He pulled her to her feet and wrapped his arms around her waist. Bea, I've spent my entire adult life building this empire, accumulating wealth and power and all the things I thought mattered, and none of it, not a single dollar of it, made me as happy as 4 days in your grandmother's quilt, eating burned pancakes and pretending I was just Michael. The office doors burst open, and Victoria Sterling strode in with a face like thunder, followed by several men in expensive suits, who could only be the board of directors. Michael, what the hell do you think you're doing? Victoria demanded. That interview has been picked up by every major news outlet in the country. The stock price has dropped 15% in the last hour, and... She stopped dead when she saw Bea. What is she doing here? Her name, Michael said, not moving away from Bea, is Bea Santos, and she's the woman I'm going to marry. The silence that followed was deafening. Absolutely not, Victoria snapped. Michael, I don't know what game she's playing, but... The only game being played here, Bea interrupted, stepping forward, is the one where powerful people think they can control everyone else's lives. Where a man's worth is measured in billions instead of how he treats the people he claims to love. She turned to face the board members, drawing strength from Michael's hand on her back. Your CEO spent 4 days as a real human being, probably for the first time in his adult life. He was kind and generous and willing to work with his hands. He was everything you've trained him not to be. Ms. Santos, one of the board members began, his tone patronizing. Surely you understand that personal feelings can't interfere with business. Business, Bea laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. You want to talk business? Fine. Let's talk about the man who was willing to pay a stranger $1 million to marry him rather than lose an inheritance. Let's talk about the CEO who's so disconnected from reality that he doesn't even remember his own grandfather's death. She pulled out her phone again, opening the recording app. And let's talk about how all of this is going to sound in my next interview. because James Morrison was just the beginning. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Victoria's face had gone pale, and the board members were exchanging worried glances. "What do you want?" Victoria asked finally. Bea looked back at Michael, seeing her own determination reflected in his storm-gray eyes. "I want you to leave us alone. All of you. Stop trying to control his life. Stop treating our relationship like a public relations problem. And let him be the man he was before you turned him into a corporate robot. And if we don't, then I burn it all down." Bea's smile was sweet as poison. "Every dirty secret, every corporate cover-up, every time you've put profits over people. I may just be a waitress from North Carolina, but I've got nothing left to lose. Can you say the same?" For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the ticking of an expensive clock on the wall. Then Michael stepped forward, his hand finding hers. "You heard her. Get out." "Michael," Victoria tried one more time. "Be reasonable." "I said get out." His voice carried all the authority of a man who'd built an empire, but underneath it was something new, something that sounded like freedom. "And Victoria? Clean out your office. You're fired." As the board members filed out, muttering among themselves, Victoria lingered for a moment. "You're making a mistake, Michael. When the novelty wears off, when you remember what you're giving up—" "I'm not giving up anything," Michael said firmly. "I'm choosing what matters." When they were finally alone, Bea turned to face the man she'd traveled 600 miles to find. "So," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the magnitude of what had just happened. "What now?" Michael smiled, the real smile, the one that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Now," he said, "I think we have a wedding to plan." "A real one this time?" "The realest." He kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promises and second chances. "Though I should probably warn you, I just lost a $23 billion inheritance and probably my job as CEO. You might be marrying a poor man." Bea laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the marble-cold office. "Good thing I'm used to poor men. Rich men are nothing but trouble." As they stood there holding each other in the ruins of Michael's corporate empire, both of them knew that the real fairy tale was just beginning, and this time, nobody was going to take it away from them. "I can't believe you're getting married in a diner." Maya stood in the doorway of Mel's diner, the same place where Bea had been humiliated by reporters just 2 weeks ago, shaking her head at the transformation. White light strung between the ceiling fans, mason jars filled with wildflowers on every table, and the entire place buzzing with an energy that had nothing to do with the usual breakfast rush. "It's perfect," Bea said, adjusting a strand of lights near the pie case. "This is where I work, where I belong, where we belong." She was wearing her grandmother's wedding dress, simple ivory lace that had been carefully preserved for 60 years, and her hair was adorned with the same wildflowers that filled the mason jars. She looked nothing like the magazine-perfect socialites Michael had been photographed with in the past, and she'd never been more beautiful. "Besides," she added with a grin, "Dave was so excited about the publicity he's letting us use the place for free. Turns out having your waitress marry a billionaire is great for business." The bell above the door chimed, and James Morrison walked in, his camera crew trailing behind him. Bea had invited him personally. If the media was going to tell her story, she was going to make sure they got it right. "Miss Santos," Morrison said, extending his hand. "Thank you for the exclusive access. This is going to be one hell of a story." "Just remember our deal," Bea said, shaking his hand firmly. "You tell the truth, all of it. The good, the bad, and everything in between. Wouldn't dream of doing anything else." Morrison glanced around the diner, taking in the casual, intimate setting. "Though I have to ask, are you sure about this? Getting married in public, I mean. After everything that's happened?" Bea looked out the window where a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Some were reporters, yes, but most were just people from town. Her neighbors, her former students. The regulars from the diner who'd known her since she was 16 and started working weekends to help pay for her guitar lessons. "I'm sure," she said. "This is our life. Our real life. Not some fantasy in a Manhattan penthouse, but right here, with real people who actually care about us. The door opened again and Michael walked in, and Bia's breath caught like it did every time she saw him. He was wearing a simple black suit, not one of his $1,000 Italian creations, but something he'd bought off the rack at a department store. His hair was slightly messed from the wind, and he was carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers that probably cost less than the boutonniere he'd worn to his last board meeting. He was perfect. "Hey," he said, stopping in front of her with the kind of smile that made her forget how to breathe. "Hey yourself." She reached up to straighten his tie, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past 2 weeks. "Ready for this?" "I've been ready since the moment I woke up in your living room." He glanced around the diner, taking in the decorations, the camera crew, the growing crowd outside. "Though I have to admit, this is not how I pictured my wedding day. Better or worse than a midnight courthouse ceremony with a complete stranger." Michael laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Definitely better. Though I should probably mention, the board voted me out yesterday." Bia's hand stilled on his tie. "What?" "Emergency session. Unanimous decision. Apparently, publicly declaring war on your own PR team and threatening to liquidate corporate assets is considered conduct detrimental to shareholder interests." He shrugged, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I'm officially unemployed." "Michael, I'm so sorry." "Don't be." He caught her hands in his, bringing them to his lips. "Bia, for the first time in my adult life, I'm free. No board meetings, no shareholder reports, no Victoria Sterling telling me what to say and how to say it. Just me. Just you," she repeated softly. "And what does just you want to do with his life?" His smile was soft, vulnerable in a way that the old Michael Ashford never would have allowed. "I want to learn how to fix things. Really fix them. Not just throw money at problems until they go away. I want to work with my hands. I want to come home to you every night smelling like sawdust instead of expensive cologne. That can be arranged." Bia's voice was thick with emotion. "I know a guy who needs help with his landscaping business. Pays minimum wage, but the benefits include getting to see me in work boots." "Deal." Michael kissed her hands again, his eyes never leaving hers. "Though you should know, I may not be a billionaire anymore, but I'm not exactly poor. I invested wisely over the years, and I have enough saved to take care of us. And maybe buy you that music school you've been dreaming about." Before Bia could respond, the diner door opened one more time, and Victoria Sterling walked in. The entire room went silent. Victoria looked exactly the same as always. Perfectly put together, expensive suit, expression that could freeze water. But there was something different about her eyes. Something that looked almost like regret. "Victoria," Michael said carefully, "what are you doing here?" "I came to deliver something that belongs to you." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick legal document. "Your grandfather's will. The real one." Bia felt Michael tense beside her. "What do you mean, the real one?" Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. "The inheritance clause was my idea, Michael, not your grandfather's. He left everything to you unconditionally when he died 6 months ago. I fabricated the marriage requirement." The silence in the diner was deafening. Michael stared at his former PR director like she'd just announced the moon was made of cheese. "You what?" "The board was concerned about your lifestyle, your refusal to settle down, your tendency to make impulsive decisions that affected the stock price. They asked me to find a way to encourage more stable behavior." Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought if you believed you had to marry by your 30th birthday, you'd choose someone appropriate, someone who could be an asset to the company. So you created a fake inheritance clause." Michael's voice was deadly quiet. "You fabricated legal documents. You made me believe I was going to lose everything. I never intended for you to run away. I never intended for you to get hurt or to meet." Victoria glanced at Bia. "I certainly never intended for you to fall in love with someone who would encourage you to burn down everything we built." "Everything you built," Bia corrected, stepping forward. "Michael didn't build a corporation. You built a cage and put him in it." Victoria looked at her for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with something that might have been respect. "You're right. I turned him into exactly what the board wanted, a perfect, controllable CEO who never caused problems or made waves. And in the process, I turned him into someone who was miserable." She handed the document to Michael. "Your inheritance is real. All $23 billion of it. No conditions, no marriage requirements, it's yours." Michael stared down at the papers in his hands, then looked up at Victoria. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," Victoria said, her professional mask finally slipping completely, "I've spent 15 years managing your life, and I've never seen you as happy as you are right now. Even though you've lost your job, even though you're getting married in a diner, even though you're about to throw away everything I taught you mattered." She paused. "Maybe I was wrong about what matters." The diner was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then Michael handed the document back to Victoria without even reading it. "Keep it," he said simply. "Michael, you don't understand. This is $23 billion. "I understand perfectly." Michael wrapped his arm around Bia's waist, pulling her close. "And I don't want it. Donate it to charity, give it to the board, I don't care. Money didn't make me happy, Victoria. Love did." Victoria stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're giving away $23 billion. "No," Bia said, standing on her toes to kiss Michael's cheek. "He's choosing what's worth more than $23 billion. The crowd outside had grown larger, pressed against the windows, and Morrison's cameras were rolling, capturing every moment of the most unconventional wedding and most expensive donation in history. "Well," Maya said, breaking the stunned silence, "if we're done redistributing fortunes, I think there's supposed to be a wedding happening here." The officiant, a local judge who'd known Bia since she was a child, stepped forward with a bemused smile. "Indeed there is. Shall we begin?" As they took their positions in front of the pie case, surrounded by friends and neighbors and the gentle hum of diner conversation, Bia realized that this was exactly how fairy tales were supposed to end. Not in a castle or a mansion, but in the place where real life happened, where real love grew. "Do you, Michael Ashford, take Beatrice Santos to be your wife?" "I do," Michael said, his voice strong and certain. "In sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, and given recent events, probably poorer, for as long as we both shall live." "And do you, Beatrice Santos, take Michael Ashford to be your husband?" Bia looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw their whole future stretched out before them. Not a life of luxury and corporate galas, but something better. Something real. Pancakes on Sunday mornings and broken faucets and the kind of love that survived hurricanes and amnesia, and even the destruction of $23 billion fortunes. "I do," she said. "I take you exactly as you are. Unemployed, slightly crazy, and absolutely perfect. You may kiss the bride." When Michael kissed her, the entire diner erupted in cheers. Outside, car horns honked and people applauded, and somewhere in the background, Morrison was probably getting the story of his career. But all Bia heard was Michael whispering against her lips, "Thank you for saving me." "Thank you," she whispered back, "for being worth saving." As they walked out of the diner hand in hand, rice and flower petals raining down around them, Bia caught sight of Victoria Sterling standing apart from the crowd. For just a moment their eyes met, and Victoria nodded, a gesture of respect, maybe even blessing. Then Michael was helping her into his car, not a limo or a luxury sedan, but the used pickup truck he'd bought to replace the one that had been destroyed by paparazzi. And they were driving away from the cameras and the crowds and the remains of his old life. "So," Bia said as they headed down the country road toward their new home, the little farmhouse where it all began, now officially belonging to both of them, "what do you want to do first as a married man?" Michael reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I want to go home. I want to sit on our porch and watch the sunset. I want to help you plant those flowers you've been talking about." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her wedding ring. "I want to start our real life together." "Our real life," Bia repeated. and the words tasted like promise and possibility and forever. 6 months later, when the documentary about their love story won an Emmy, and when Michael's carpentry business had grown enough to hire 3 employees, and when Bia's music school had opened to a waiting list of 50 students, they would look back on this moment as the beginning of everything that mattered. But for now, there was just the open road, and the man she loved, and the extraordinary feeling of being exactly where she belonged. The fairy tale hadn't ended after all. It had just become real.